Assembly Rules Committee of the Whole. It is Thursday, September 9, 2021. We're noticed from 1 to 3 p.m. today. We'll go ahead and start with the roll. I believe we have 2 members on the phone.
Assemblywoman Jamie Allard. Meg Balto.
Thank you. And then around the room,
Cameron Perez-Verdia.
John Weddleton.
Pete Peterson.
Felix Rivera.
Crystal Kennedy.
Forrest Bar.
Austin Quinn Davidson.
Suzanne LaFrance. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Agendas are on the table in the back. We'll go ahead and go through our new business, starting with a brief report from me, followed by the municipal clerk, and touch on a few items. We don't have anything under unfinished business, and then we'll have time for audience participation at the end. So just a few things from me. The clerk's office sent out an email reminder about keeping office doors, your personal office doors, locked when you're not in the office suite. And please keep in mind that no one has the code to your office except you and facility maintenance. And if you need to update your code, please contact facility maintenance to do that. Second, I want to note on the assembly strategic. Oh, sorry, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Sorry. Why is that? Is it you just want us to be protected? Like why isn't that sort of our call?
Leaving the door open? Yes, to be protected. And Ms. Jones, did you want to add anything to that? We had some conversation.
We did, Madam Chair. The idea was that if you were working on something personal or private or legislation, that you needed a space to be able to do that and to know that there wasn't anyone else that could have access to that. So it was a benefit for you. You don't have to take advantage of it, but we wanted to set it up that way.
Okay, thank you. If I ever have anything confidential, I will make sure.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Quinn. Oh, it's the Rules Committee. We can use first names. Thanks, Austin. Cameron.
Yes, so contacting facility maintenance, who do we contact and what is the contact information for that person?
The email that I sent out had the email address. It's called Facility Maintenance Work Requests at anchorageak.gov. And the telephone number I do not have memorized, but it was also in the email. I can forward it to everybody again.
And the telephone number is 343-8465. And those little brightly colored slips of paper that were distributed to our offices and in a previous meeting have that information there.
I have extras if anybody needs one. And one other thing I would like to add, Austin, I will use first names. You said that you'll keep your door locked. If you do have confidential information, I think that it might not just be confidential information. It might be personal things in your office or your suite or something like that. We don't have anyone monitoring the suite. So we want to make sure that you know that if you leave your door open, your personal belongings in your room are not protected.
Got it. Great. Thank you. Any other comments or questions about the office space? Okay. The second thing I wanted to touch on, the Assembly strategic plan and priorities that Felix is helping move forward. I just wanted to mention that we're going to be scheduling time in October for essentially a long work session, maybe somewhere between 4 and 6 hours, just to book it on the calendar so that we can continue that work of refreshing the document. And by then too, we will have Claire Ross on board who can help. The plan is just to do that here in this room. And then finally, I'm asking members to contribute photos for a slideshow to play before assembly meetings and during breaks. Thank you, John, for that suggestion. And the clerk's office has created a space on the G drive, and she will be, I believe Barbara or Jennifer will be sending out information specifically about where to or how to access the G drive or the location for that file, and then a file name protocol, with a year, month, date, your last name, and numbering photos if you put more than one in that folder each day. And a reminder, please don't send photos or include photos of a partisan nature, like political events, especially so that when the clerk's office is working on this project, they can stay neutral and impartial. And the idea too is that with the shared folder, assembly members can look and see what other members have contributed. Mention that on the budget priorities document, actually, you know what? It's on the agenda as a separate item under D, so I'll wait on that one. Barbara.
So I always talk to you about three things, or I try. And so the first thing is we've gotten a lot done on the special election. Erica sent you an update on it. There was about twice as much as that done, but we are proceeding, and we're pretty excited about that. We're gonna send out a press release tomorrow. September is National Voter Registration Month, and we're gonna kind of do a push for that and encourage people to vote, register to vote before the deadline for this election, which is September 26th, to be able to vote in the special. That would be number one. Number two, I'll tell you some of the things that are happening in the clerk's office. Commissions. We're really busy with the Board of Ethics, and we've probably had more cases in the last year on the Board of Adjustment than we've had in over 5 years. It's really been a lot of work. And the Board of Ethics is meeting extra longer, so we're pretty busy with them too. And records is another focus. We're really trying to get the records of the assembly all caught up because we weren't here in person for a while, and so getting those records caught up is pretty important and a high priority. We also have some really old records that we've brought from archives, and we're going through those and getting those cleaned up. It'll save us money in the long run, so we're working on that. I know that some of you are using the public portal, and we really appreciate that. We notice that there's sometimes links that don't always work correctly. Somebody contacted me, and when we saved the document, we saved it as AO 2021 -1, and so the system didn't pick it up because it's not trained to do --. It's trained to pick up 2021-1. And so that hyperlink didn't work. So send me, and Jenna is my helper, and Jenna and I are getting those to IT to get those corrected, both on our G drive and in the public portal. But I'm really glad with how that's working. I think we'll probably be doing some training muni-wide on the public portal to really help people understand what an incredible tool that is. And Mr. Weddleton used it today. Is that right? And it worked pretty good? Good. Anybody else used it? Christopher, good. So some people have used it. It's really amazing. Good, you've used it too, Austin?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I think it's really amazing. I just love it. So third thing is safety. I know that Felix knows that my children call me www.worrywart.com. So I want to remind you of some safety protocols now that you are down here in your own offices. We have made up a safety binder for you. It will be in your suite. Some of this information is posted back here. There are 2 different protocols for earthquake or for fire. So for earthquake, after the shaking stops, wait to evacuate. And if there's an earthquake, you go to town square. And the reason that you go to town square is because there's no buildings around. And you go out, but you go down the alley and up the street. So don't go through the middle here because they don't want something to fall on you. But anyway, there's where the first floor goes. Don't leave, please. The idea of rally point is that someone is supposed to say, like, oh, I know that John and Felix were in their offices, and then John and Felix are over here. If John ends up over here, says, I wonder where Felix is, and we do hope that you're not still in the building, injured or something like that. So that's why we want people to rally and meet up. The building safety officer is Mike Chadwick, and he'll dismiss you, or the floor safety officer will dismiss you. It's kind of complicated because the floor safety officer is going to be on the other side, and they have had 2 floor safety officers because it's pretty complicated when everybody in the building is exiting in the lobby to get from one side to the other. If, in fact, town square is not available, your secondary rally point is the parking lot, okay? And then just head over to the parking lot, and this is your location. Again, these are posted back here, and they'll be posted in your office. That parking lot over there, and you are farthest from, so you're gonna be across from the old transit center farther away. But if there's a fire, you go to a different location. You're gonna go to the Denina. And you're all the way on the end on the Denina. But again, you have to go that way, down the street and around. You can't go through the parking lot, go up G Street. They just are asking that.
So is it a different location so we can watch?
So you can watch the fire? Well, no, I think they're not. For some of us during the earthquake, when we went over here. So our rally location is inside the Denina. And so you're inside the Denina, and I don't know if you remember, but the traffic lights were swaying and people were a little bit worried. And I think some people were standing in the streets, which again wasn't safe. And so that's why they don't want you to go over there during an earthquake. So watch the fire. You can, it was on that. No, I'm joking. Okay, so thank you everyone for tolerating our little safety briefing here. And if you're here in City Hall, just please stay safe, stay together. Make sure that you let someone know. If you're leaving, just let someone know so that we're not looking for you.
I have a question, Barbara.
Mhm.
So is it mandatory evacuation for an earthquake of a certain size?
So what will happen is something will come over the speakers. It will tell you what to do. Like the alarm will sound and someone will say, you must evacuate the building. So you will get instructions.
Okay,
All right,
thank you.
yes.
Anybody else have any questions? Thanks, Barbara.
You're welcome.
Okay, so item B is assembly priorities, and as I mentioned, we'll be scheduling something in October to dig into that refresh. We've added the equity pillar to the list. Item C, assembly member discussion on pending business and update from committees, upcoming business. Oh, sorry, Cameron, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question why the word pillar is there.
Oh, we can edit that off. Thanks, Cameron. Okay, so before we go around the room, let's start with an update on the facilitated collaborative process between the administration and legislative drafting group. And who is taking that one?
I corrected the talking points.
You corrected them?
I didn't correct them.
Oh, you didn't?
I just printed them.
Are you print them? I have on my phone, I can go through it.
So John, you'll start and then.
Yeah, well, it's going well. We're spending a lot of time, and we had like a 5-hour meeting a couple days ago. Short one a few days later to follow up, so it's fairly lengthy, but there's a lot of information out there. I think it's, so we're moving forward. I mean, my big optimistic stance is wherever we land will be better than where we are now, so there'll be progress forward. We saw a long list of about 30 properties, just a huge brainstorming list. We've narrowed that down to, I think it's 3, 6, 8. I can go through those, except we knocked 2 off. Boutte Company, which is a term contractor for the city, was chosen to do just rough order of magnitude costs on either remodeling a building to get it where we would need it, or building something, preparing land and building something on the land. So they're still working on that, but it's be really high level because it's they have 3 or 4 weeks to work on it. So it's, but just really just for comparing locations, not necessarily for budgeting purposes. So they're working on that with a team, and that seems to be, they're confident that they can meet a schedule. We should expect a mass care appropriation request to cover operations through the end of the year, including congregate and non-congregate. We're going to get out of the Sullivan as soon as we can, but we'll stay in there until there's a workable alternative, which is interesting. We just had a conversation that's slightly different than that. So the conversation we're having in our meetings is we do expect to be there quite a long time, and that there should be something like a not to exceed amount without any specific. Maybe we'll be in Sullivan, some of that may be used to start moving to one of these other locations should they be ready. The list of places that are actually, we identified 78 alternative sites. Many got moved on pretty quick, but that was a combination of all the early ones that were done by the previous administration. Some of the things we just remember from emails that people sent us, and then things that came out more recently, current administration. So it was a huge comprehensive list, and we whittled it down. Sullivan Arena is the base case. I mean, we're there. It's not a great place to be, but we're there. Another was a small building on Arctic that is under contract to be bought. So we scratched that off the list. Another is the old Johnson's Tire on Denali, which is quite large. So that's certainly a possibility. There's 550 Regal, which is the old Pacific Northern Academy owns it, an old Willowa. So potentially something there. The old Alaska Club still on the list for potential use. The old archive site we had on the list is a vacant land, but it has quite a bit of wetlands, Class A wetlands, I think, so difficult to develop. So I believe we crossed that off, Chris, is that right? So that one was moved off. And then the Tudor Elmore site, which would include 2 versions. One is where the administration had mentioned it, where the evidence lot is, and another version of that would be maybe a similar structure, but over where the plan is to move the evidence lot. So over on that Tudor Elmore, they're closer, either maybe where Tozier Track is, now that we own that, or but more in that corner of it. Screening criteria for rent and for sale. On-site and available utilities for the vacant lands, ability to configure for congregate care. We want to avoid areas that already have a lot of shelters already covering that area, so downtown would be one. But we've got scattered sites now, Rescue Mission, their house, and so on, going to the house. We got Boutte working on it. Target date for recommendation moved to September 14th. I don't think that's right. I think we moved it later than that. I'm reading notes that Belinda put together. But the current timeline would be, we are 9/8. We have a summary. Do you have a proper one?
And yes, I have you for us, and then Meg is also on the line to add information as well,
Okay, good.
and then Cameron.
So we're looking, so 9/8 is basically this status update right now, or today's 9/9, anyway, today. 9/15, we'll have a lot more information at the Committee on Housing and Homelessness. We should have some of those rough order magnitudes from the Boutte Company. 9/24, engineering site assessment, cost estimate report that would be much tighter. October 5th work session with the assembly and public to get an update. October 12th is assembly meeting, may have some document for budgeting to move forward. And then we'd like to have, we're not quite sure when, but at that point, we're getting to where we're gonna say, this is the location or locations that we're looking at. But now we have big news, and the public will be very, very much involved. So we would present it likely at the assembly meeting, but with statement at that point, we will have a town hall at some point where people can tell us what they think about it and share information and so on. We penciled in October 15th, but it really would vary somewhat, but we know people want to have something to say about it, opportunity for us to discuss. And we'd expect then also public hearing at some point. So that's the state of the art on the email talking points, and I think Chris, and I should say in the committee, the people working on the administration side are tremendous. Chris is so knowledgeable, and Meg brings so much value to this conversation. Sources, routines, the different providers and so on. So she's definitely the workhorse of the team. So thank you, Meg.
Thank you, Meg.
Thanks, John. And actually, before we go to questions, we'll go to Meg and then Chris to add, and then in the queue for questions, I have Forrest, Cameron, and Felix. So Meg, do you want to add anything?
Thanks, Suzanne. There was no intent for the 15th to have anything at the Committee on Housing and Homelessness. It feels a little premature given that we'll have the full site assessment and cost estimate report on the 24th coming through, then with a review with the body on the 5th of October. That said, if we hear questions today or as we discuss this and there's something that we should bring the facilitators into the committee or we want to address, please speak up and let us know. There's some room left on that agenda and I'm happy to accommodate that. Other than that, there was one property I believe we put on here that didn't make the talking points, and Chris and John can remind me if I'm mistaken, which is the old Claire house. It was one of the smaller facilities we were going to have added back on as we look, not at the immediate, but at the medium to long-term question. Thanks.
Thanks, Meg.
Yeah,
Chris,
so
do you wanna-
I would add, one of the interesting kind of tension points that arose in our conversation yesterday was our previous framework put out two questions. One is what's the resolution of mass care for this year, the short-term question. Number two, what's our plan for the long question? And there were some serious back and forth, a little bit of warmth in the room over the conversation of, are we being realistic, thinking that we could move out before winter or even before spring of next year of the mass shelter? And I would characterize that conversation as kind of a back and forth to getting to where we share an idea of what we're talking about, because there's always emotion around these conversations. And it became clear, as was previously stated, that the Sullivan Arena, until there's an option that doesn't put masses of people out on the street, is in fact what we have. And so there's some recognition that there's no rush that we're going to be able to pursue to change anything by October, November. So then came the question of, well, then shouldn't we just turn our attention to question number two, long-term question? There was some tension around that because we've been working through the process on question one. So there's really an interesting conversation now about how to have both conversations at once, which then raises the issue of maybe then we need to go back and look at our list of properties that we took off because we weren't considering them for the long term. And so that process is kind of underway. It's a little bit soft. And so we're kind of in an interstitial space of figuring out how to respond to the two questions separately or together. I just want to characterize that that's kind of where the work is at, I think. All of these facts that you heard John read through are accurate statements of where we are. And it's an interesting conversation with a moving target, which is hard to be having a negotiation. So that would be my addition.
Oh, thanks, Chris. John is going to add, and then I've got a bit of a list here, so I can add you to it. John?
Okay. So one thing on Chris's point, where the Aviary Hotel, which has about 200 people now, would be available through the end of February before they start rebuilding it, but they've said they're about ready to go. So that becomes much, much closer. So if you add 200, the Sullivan Marine is handling 400 or so, it can't really handle another 200. So the urgency in finding something additional is fairly quick. It's on us now.
Thanks, John. And sorry, Austin, you just wanted to ask the talking points?
I had some other questions too, but I just missed something John said earlier, so I can clarify. But I can just get in line. Is this the same thing? Is it Barbara's, I think? Bonnie? Belinda. Did she send, it's the same thing she sent
It
us?
should be,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, well, then we'll go ahead and go through the queue. We'll start with Forrest, Cameron, Felix, and then Austin. So,
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think Chris and John have got to this, but I kind of want to put a finer point on it. When I saw that list, there are some buildings on there that might make sense long-term as if we were to divide up mass care. If you're coming from, and I don't know if you are you working from the assumption that mass care has to be one place? Because if so, then we know the Alaska Club isn't large enough. And probably, there are probably some others on that list that aren't large enough. But long term, if we're gonna have 2 or 3 facilities, then they're very much, the kind of facilities we would look to. Conversely, maybe you believe that the property where the evidence lot now is a good place to put a smaller long-term facility. But I don't believe that mass care could go there because it would take us a very long time to get that site ready and constructed. I do not believe that it could be done this winter. And so, because the vehicles are there and all the security we need to build the other site, let alone running utilities and that kind of thing. So I guess, first of all, is your assumption that mass care has to be all in one place? The portion of mass care that's currently the Sullivan, obviously, not talking about the other sites. And then, yeah, how do you balance that where you're putting buildings on or you're pulling buildings off because you're focused on the mass care, but the truth is those sites are perfectly suitable for a long-term smaller facility. Is there any?
Suzanne, could I answer Forrest's question?
go ahead, Meg.
Thanks. Forrest, you really got to the tension of the discussion. I believe it was, I think just yesterday, if we're turning to a medium or longer term question and mass care versus the idea of a shelter. Because the original slate of properties and some that we had screened out because they were not immediately available. Whereas if we are not looking at immediacy because mass care is going to remain at the Sullivan, knowing that we can't stand anything up immediately or even in 90 days, then as we turn to that medium long-term question, should additional places go on that list? A few we tried to put on that list or we wanted on that list that may not have just been available. One was the old JCPenney furniture warehouse on Arctic. It went under contract for sale. Similarly, the Universal building. That's why I believe the old Claire house is now back on the list that wasn't before. And the idea here, again, is there may be, and there is difference to me at least, about what we would evaluate for a shelter versus a mass care facility. And so as we look at the evaluation criteria, I think we're looking at the medium to long term. We have to look at what we would want for purposes of a shelter, not just what we've done for mass care. I hope that helps provide some clarification.
It does. I'll just say that tension seems almost irreconcilable. So good luck.
I would add something.
Okay.
And just,
Unless you have 2 separate lists of facilities, one for long-term short and one for mass care.
and some of them fit on both.
Yep.
I think that the tension resolved on the point that the considerations that I heard presented move off of question 1, if you will, which is short-term, right now, what are we doing? There's a strong desire not to have the question then fall into the, well, we'll get to it someday, right? It's now a longer-term question, so we can stop putting our finest attention on it. And so I think that the agreement that we walked away with really resolved around, no matter which way we approach the two questions, we can't let off the gas on moving towards whatever answer it is. We have to deal with this now, which is highlighted or accentuated by what Mr. Welton said about the Aviator and the potential for an additional 200 people needing to be housed in some short-term manner. And so to me, it was a good faith conversation around, we need to make sure, even if we change our posture on the question, we don't start relaxing.
Council, really quick follow-up.
Sure, go ahead.
So for the Aviator question, is one of the options not any of these, but a different hotel?
Maybe, right?
Or a different set of hotels that I'd be willing, right during the winter period, there are many more hotel rooms available. Is that an option?
It literally just landed on the table and we didn't spend any time in the details, but yes.
We discussed that. I mean, it's a challenge to get that many, but there's other stuff going on outside of our little piece of it. I mean, that continuum care we've all been talking about has, housing and then mass care, obviously the hotels. Allison probably knows all this better than any of us, what the options are there. So that's absolutely, we just know we have to take care of them. Would it be in something short? That's a very near-term problem, and nothing we have here is anywhere near that close. So something else has to give it, and it could be like a worst case, but to handle the surge, as we're calling it, you got our rec centers. We did it at Fairview. You got other rec centers. That's not what we want, but we're an emergency. We don't get what we want. We get what we have to do.
Yeah, there's no action option.
Now, I'll tell you on the different sites, it gets fairly complicated. Like one issue that we have is we have medically fragile at Brother Francis, and they can only handle, I think it's up to about 60 with that type of person. But we sure like to get the traditional shelters up to their old capacity, so they can be up to about 150 or so if we got those medically fragile out of there. We've got, I think, 20 or more medically fragile, the Aviator and a similar number unknown, but roughly in the Sullivan. They don't belong there. So if they were all moved to the Alaska Club. Now, that's not threatening the neighborhood because this isn't really a shelter. This is more a convalescence home for people who don't have homes. They're not the threat people are threatened by. So that location was probably okay. We toured it with some of the providers. They said there's potential. But if not there, somewhere similar. But where that medically fragile would be together. And what you do then is then you free up room in the Brother Francis, and you've taken care of some of that in the other location. So you've decreased the need. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, and it's hard to deal with, in a hurry and doing it. But that gets your little smaller shelter, and ultimately a big one was chosen somewhere somehow. We don't want that for the long term. Because the long term, the traditional shelters will resume their capacity, so that can shrink. We'll get more people in housing. The opioid epidemic will abate, et cetera, and so on. And all good things will happen, and we won't need as much of it. So I don't think a mega shelter is on the books at all. But it's something on the large end, but mid-range, I think it's 400, 450. That should shrink. This is not anyone's dream to have on that size any length of time. We're in a special time right now.
Thanks, John. And I know Meg wanted to further respond. Meg?
Thanks, Suzanne. Just really quickly on the leaving us for service before we had anticipated, which had been a February date. It seems like the provider community, the health department, mass care, everyone's working very diligently to find a replacement. So I just want to kind of state that, don't let that throw up. I mean, it's concern, but it's not like a huge alarm bell that should go off. We should know more in about a week. And we still have 30 to 60 days to work through that process. So I just didn't want that to become any sort of a panic point. Thanks.
Thanks, Meg. And Forrest, I'll go ahead and move on to the next member in the queue, which is Cameron.
Thanks. So I'm going to just lay out a variety of thoughts / questions, and then I'll be able to circle back and I think ask some specific questions. I'm I'm still not sure that I understand that there is agreement among this group on what the specific problem is. If you're debating things as broad as short-term and long-term and distributed versus mass care, like if there's clarity on what specific problem are you trying to address at this time, and what are you going to address? We're going to talk about later. Like, what is the problem right now that you're trying to solve? So that's one concern that I have. And the other is what I'm hearing in terms of process. I'm hearing you're going shopping for a building, but I don't know if there's agreement on the assumptions, the size, the services, the budget, the you know, those kinds of things, even a framework of that, so that you know what you're going and looking for. So that's what I'm not clear on as well. And the other piece of the process that I'm concerned about is that there's only 3 of you, and there's 11 of us total. And so in a negotiated process, normally you would come to some agreement, and then you'd finalize that. Then you'd build the next agreement, you'd finalize that. So you're building towards it, but it's not coming back to us for agreement on the pieces you're building. And so what I'm worried is that you guys maybe are agreeing as you're moving forward, but it's not coming back. And so you'll get so far into the process and then come back and we're like, wait a minute, that's not at all what I was hoping. So I'm wondering where that sort of circle back piece is to go, here we agreed on this, this, and this. We all agreed on this, this, and this. Then you can go back to the process saying, okay, we have confirmation that we're all on the same page. And the piece I'm more concerned about is the other side of it. Recently, as you all know, the health department came out with very specific recommendations for Anchorage. And we came out with very specific recommendations to recommend to the mayor. But the mayor said, no, I don't want to make those recommendations, even though my health department said those are the recommendations, right? So my concern is the mayor involved in this process? What is the likelihood that you'll come out of it with an agreement of some sort, and he'll say, nope, don't want to do that. That's not working for me. So I'm wondering where that feedback is for him as well. So I know that's a lot, but those are some of the key pieces that I'm concerned about as far as what I've heard so far.
Thanks, Cameron. Meg will speak to your questions first, and then Chris, and then John, if you want to. Meg?
Thanks, Suzanne. I'm going to start with that question. I think it was like the second to last one, Cameron, about agreements and agreements or negotiations. So first, this is a facilitation, and I can pretty much guarantee you there aren't always agreements happening in that facilitation room. And the idea is for us to bring back information, both as to viability of potential locations, ways in which potential locations have been winnowed down, criteria in which they could be assessed to get your feedback, and hear your disagreement if you disagree with them. And not everyone in the room has to agree on anything. It's all captured. I can tell you, I often don't agree with everyone in the room, maybe much to somewhat the facilitator's frustration sometimes. So I just wanted to kind of address that there isn't any kind of agreement other than the problem statement, which is what do we do? I don't have it in front of me, and I apologize to read it, that second problem statement, but what do we do to address this need of both shelter and navigation within the continuum of care? And is it just we're looking at, when mass care ends, where will people go if it exceeds our capacity? And then, like John said, amongst all the moving parts of if Brother Francis were to resume a different capacity level because they're caring for low barrier folks. And as we move all the missing or all the different pieces around, what do we need to stand up? Is it any different than what we were planning last summer or not? And then what does that potentially look like? And to bring that menu of options forward to the body, and that next opportunity that we will have some feedback on potential
Meg?
Cheers.
I think we have lost her. Okay.
So I would just add, there is a report that was due by the resolution right around the 15th, some update. There is a planned opportunity, and they use the term work session. We're working to decide whether it's an actual work session or if it's gonna be like we did on the 25th of August, which is the facilitator hosts a meeting, the public is invited. And I would suggest that your concept of what's happening is much more optimistic in the timeline than reality. And what I mean by that is we aren't anywhere near any of those decisions, and we've spent at least 25 to 30 hours meeting. And so the process of getting to a point where we have anything even useful to bring forward is much slower than our process normally allows, because we work at the speed of the assembly meetings, getting things on the table and getting them done. And so I would just offer it's painfully slow. There are many things I would rather be doing, and we haven't made any decisions or any concessions, if you will. It's all been narrowing down what are the considerations, what are the deciding factors that we would review these questions with. Like, we're still in that space. We're not at the space where we're making concessions other than like, oh, let's take the building off the list because it just sold. It's no longer in consideration. And that's kind of the decisions that have been made are just very simple based on some facts that are incontrovertible. And so from a process perspective, I would just say painful and slow.
John, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I haven't found it painful. It's been time consuming, but I'm optimistic because I think we'll land in a better place, and that makes it all worthwhile. One important point for Cameron is we are not a committee or simply three people who've been very involved over the last year drafting some legislation related to B3. So we've kind of been the three moving forward, but this is a legislative drafting group. So this does not preclude you from doing your own. Or I think Jamie had said, we don't speak for her. She can certainly do her own effort. And what happens is we have something for it, an AO, an AR, and it goes through our normal processes with amendments and public hearings and so on. So we will put something fairly well documented with how we got to this starting point.
Yeah,
for the
something happened to our.
assembly process. But it really, we will come forward with a starting point for the assembly process.
I would just
No final
caveat
decision.
that when I say painful, it's, I have sacrificed a number of other meetings. I've had to turn away from other opportunities. To me, that's pretty painful because this is dominating my calendar in a way that nothing has since I've been on the body. And the progress has been slow, right? Where I like to get done, that's not happening here because the depth of the information we're struggling through. So when you finally see what comes back from the engineer, what comes back from the folks who are gonna put together a sense of the cost of operations, I hope, is a spreadsheet that you can actually review the details, the cost of operations, the cost of potential buildings, choose this option, this is the cost, choose that option, this is the cost. Also a conversation about what a member of the public brought to us, not just economies of scale, but economies of outcomes. What about the outcomes? What's important there? And so all of that should hopefully come forward in a package for people to be able to chew on and really think about and make decisions from. It's slow.
Let me just pause for a second to check that we have Ms. Zalatel and Ms. Allard both on the line and able to hear. Are you both there?
I wonder if somebody took our phone across this. Do we have a phone across the way?
Okay. No.
Somehow, from the time Mandy walked up to you and came back, it canceled again.
Okay, so we're working on a technical issue here. I wonder if we should take a break. I think let's go ahead and take a 5 to 10 minute break. Let's go back.
Stay.
All right.
Please enter your participant or moderator code followed by the pound key. Please say your name followed by the pound key. You are the first participant in the conference.
All right.
So that's short-term. That's great. Why are you even having a conversation?
Yes, this is Jamie. I can hear you guys now.
Oh, great, thanks, Jamie.
This is a short term.
You don't know that.
What I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to create a challenge. So, just trying to say.
And they had it out there, and, they had it, you know, those are like a little building down. Here they got,
And they're not gonna be.
you not know what
Those kinds of things. Help build the relationship with the actual build. So that's what I was doing. That's sort of thing. It's like, okay, that,
stay away from.
looking at finding a building, doesn't feel like progress to you.
We have the word
Can't even agree on.
introduction. And that's supposed to be like people know who's in the room.
There is.
Roll call.
We do have.
And then you have introduction. I'm the only one from the public, right?
Right, and that's what we presented there.
Remember, yep.
They were
Even though.
Right.
but we went over this in 78. Most of which was 30.
Right.
But we said, okay, we've got ability and size. We did have criteria to go to when it went down and now to go here. We're working on our other criteria. Which service is basically our minimum. If you rank places, of course, if they have more services, that should be a plus. They all have to be system. So we are, and that's not 100%. So the next meeting, Monday, we'll find out that criteria. A week or two later, we're back to costs. So we just don't have all the information. But it is definitely. We were told, they report to the mayor. We and we want to make it. So they know that we are all concerned.
That's very.
Remind ourselves of that. And providers have been involved with that, like 3 letters, very, 6 pages. Their water, they you can mask care or something. So. Sounds like this week. So what? But obviously, if that's something that right now, yes, right. So it seems like in terms of like where their priorities are, trying to adjust to it. I mean, that's for the reason why they were talking about temporary. So temporary, those firms start. They got first slow, I know, decade. I know, really. Yeah. But we had, big companies. That's just offset in. And then along their timeline, they have overlap. So they're starting. There's way more bill. So they're getting.
The mayor put this thing up.
So that's why we said. So lots happening. It's actually. But it's a question. Is the mayor on board? Maybe he'll.
Right, well, and at least having, most of them having like his non-negotiable.
Great, sounds like Megan.
Meg, is that new? And we've got,
I'm here.
okay, so we've got Daisy and Meg on. We're just waiting for a couple more members. Get back and then we'll go ahead and continue. Thanks for standing by.
I see Meg and Jamie are on.
Oh, thanks.
So that's,
Chris, I think.
that's a lot.
Chris. Okay. Everybody ready to get started again? Barbara, are you ready? We're ready? We're ready? Okay. Okay, thanks, everybody. We've got Meg and Jamie back on the line, and Cameron, Meg, and Chris and John have provided some responses to your question. Did you have follow-up?
No, good.
You're good? Okay, thanks. We'll go ahead then and move on to Felix.
Thanks, Suzanne. So yeah, I guess my question is more sort of on the public facing side of things. So the last update that we got, it sounded like there were two separate questions, two separate timelines, and how things seem to be a lot more complicated, which is fine. It's a complicated issue. I'm wondering, so it looks like October 5th is going to be the next public update. Is there anything that's going to be shared prior to October 5th so that folks can get a sense of the changes and the dynamics that are going on right now? And in particularly, I'm asking because, we're all starting to go to all of our community councils again, and I don't know if they're asking about this in your community councils, but they certainly are in mine. And thankfully, most of the time I have Meg there to respond, but not everyone has a Meg, so.
Okay, who would like to take this one?
I think I got the question. We will not have a decent idea of the rough order of magnitude cost to rank that list of buildings until 24th. So it would be somewhat premature. We could embellish on what we said today, which was, I think, supposed to be a short conversation in another meeting, but we are somewhat constrained by that. And the reality of that's an incredibly fast timeline for these consultants already. I mean, they grab together a team and they stop doing everything except this on other projects. So I think that would be, we would start getting the information. We want to process it and then bring it back.
Okay. Yeah, I guess if there are any other responses. So yeah, thanks for that, John. So for me, what we've gotten, which I'm assuming the talking points that we received are all open to the public that we can share. Belinda shared them with us a while ago.
Okay, well, there's a new one she sent just earlier today that she sent to us to review. And I think one point Meg had said we need to add back the old Claire house, which is fairly small capacity, but it functions. And then take off the archive site that's still on the list she sent. So I think we need to get back with some feedback. But when we get that later today, probably she'll send it out, and that would be state of the art.
Okay, great. Then I guess besides sort of assembly members using those talking points in our community councils, I just think we've heard it time and time again, so I don't need to repeat it, but the more that we keep the public in the loop and sort of give the public a lot of lead time over whatever we decide to do, the better. But I definitely appreciate all of the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Felix. I want to second that as well. Thank you, John and Meg, and Chris stepped out, but for the work that you've been doing. So Austin is next in the queue.
They're both out there talking together.
Okay, Austin, you're next in the queue.
Oh, good timing. Thank you. So I was just gonna ask that the notes that I think's getting sort of to Cameron's concern, First of all, I just want to say thanks again to the three of you for working on this because it's taking a lot of time and it's a lot of work. And so I think while we're also wanting to be involved, I just want to be thankful too. Like, it's a big job, so thank you. But I think to Cameron's point about feeling more engaged in the process, like those notes, they're updated, but I don't think we got those circulated. So I guess I would like to request following, like once a week, or maybe following specific sessions, could one of you write up some notes and say, here's where we are and circulate them to the group? Because I think part of the thing is just a disconnect and we're not allowed to talk with you about it, so.
I think if I might, the best answer from that is we'll ask the facilitator to do that.
Sure, yeah.
Because they're in between and then it's not a member kind of certainly outside of the order. So, but yes, we'll make sure that that happens at the end of every week at least. And if we meet multiple times a week and there's significant, yes, we can do that.
That would be great, because you know, we're going to community councils, so what happened or we don't have the accurate list. And I think that would really help.
Well, if I could, we just got this afternoon or this morning, the draft talking points for our meeting.
Okay, so it's brand.
But there were a couple things you need to tweak, I think the dates and take off at Fair House, which we discussed here. So that's kind of been a routine and then it gets sent out.
Okay.
So she just sent it for us to look at really quick and zip it out there.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, we'll add that to the order.
Thanks, Austin. Did you have anything else?
That's it.
Okay, how about anyone else? Other questions or
I would,
comments?
yeah,
Chris?
I would offer last night at my community councils, it was interesting, they definitely had it in their mind that the working group would be making updates to community councils, which I thought was very interesting. So it's something we have to figure out is what updates we would send out more broadly, but that's TBD at this time. So the community council plays a role.
Thanks, Chris. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and move on then to the next item on the agenda. Actually, since we're under discussion on pending business, we could do a quick roundtable. If anyone wants to add anything about what they're working on, and we can go ahead and start with the phone. Jamie, do you want to add anything here?
No.
Okay, thanks. How about you, Meg, on any work that you've got going on?
Sure. A couple of items coming. I mentioned the amendment with regard to mass care. I'm also working with regards to, we have some unspent dollars in the alcohol tax that had originally been slated for shelter operations for this year if we were going to independently turn on shelter, which we haven't. There's options I'll be bringing forward for those, the meeting of the 28th. And then pretty much most of my time has been spent with regards to the facilitation, but have a wonderful new resource. And so if you have questions through the clerk that you would like to send, if you have any about kind of best practices around current individual who works for USICH, which is Dr. Marbut's old Trump position. You know, under President Trump, this is Katie Miller. She's offered to assist us as we walk through these questions and work on crafting policy. That's a really exciting development that just happened. And happy if you want to send any questions into the clerk office to get those out to her. And she's really offered to help assist us as we work through this facilitation process and beyond. Thanks.
Thanks, Meg. We'll go ahead and go around the room then. Cameron?
Yeah, just I'm narrowing down the person who can help to facilitate the process of the ad hoc committee on equity. So I've narrowed that down, and I'm pretty close to talking to Felix about it. And we're on that. That's probably the only update at this point.
Thanks, Cameron. John?
Yeah, I got a whole bunch of things that may or may not make progress quickly. One is we're looking through the Community Economic Development Committee at the assessor's process, particularly with vacant land. And we're kind of getting towards core issues. And one is the formulas they use for some of the more subjective aspects of valuing the land. And what is the value of an appraisal? If someone has a contested assessment and they get an appraisal done, how is that factored in? Some other issues. The rights of way and easements, how we address those has been parked a little bit, but it's still on the list. We have almost ready to go, 99% ready, new quasi-judicial procedures we've been talking about for almost 2 years. Those will get done. Marijuana law changes, I think, are on Dean's desk coming fairly soon. We have the long-range transportation plan working its way through the system, largely led by the planning department, going to planning and zoning commission, and a variety of people there. There's a new scoring system for the TIP proposed. It's out for public comment, I think, just for a few more days. And it takes a lot of subjective stuff, makes it more objective, organizes it better. So I think it'll be an improvement wherever we land on it. We also, today at the Community Economic Development Committee, looked at some changes in the vacant housing laws that we did in 16 and 19, and I think a little more recently, and how they mesh with Title 23, the building code, and nuisance properties and so on. And Bob Dole's kind of looked back and said, okay, we've had some experience for a number of years and some of this isn't working well. So they will be coming forward in the next couple of weeks with some proposed changes on that. And that's all I remember.
Thanks, John. Pete?
Well, we've got our first subcommittee meeting for the reapportionment drawing into districts. And so that's something we'll be working on the next couple of months. And we're also going to be working with the clerk's office to make some updates to Title 28, like we usually do every year after month or two.
Thanks, Pete. Felix?
Thanks. I don't have any personal substantive updates on the committee side. The committee has a meeting next week where we're going to be going over all of the audit reports that we've gotten for the various boards and commissions, and basically talking about the sunset provisions for those, and do we want to sunset them, do we want to extend, that kind of dilemma. And then we'll also have a discussion on the short-term rentals, and this is something that John has brought to the attention of the committee. And basically, are we getting everything that we want out of short-term rentals in terms of taxation, and are there loopholes that folks are taking advantage of? So we'll have that discussion in audit, and then eventually when we get the annual financial report, we will have that in audit as well. I suspect we're not going to get it with enough lead time for the committee that's planned for next week, so there'll probably be a separate committee meeting planned for that one. And just as a reminder, that this audit's going to have the normal audit we do, plus the normal single audits, the federal and state. I think additive this year is going to be the FEMA audit, which I think is going to be of interest to a lot of people.
Thanks, Felix. Crystal?
Thank you. I probably need to talk to either you, Suzanne, or John, but Eagle River Chugach area is looking to find funding for concept design for their cemetery. And I know we've talked a little bit about trying to kind of keep Girdwood and Chugach Eagle River kind of going through the motions and the steps together just for mutual support purposes. So looking at having a meeting next week with the municipal manager and Adam Trombley, just to kind of discuss kind of what our options might be for maybe putting that on the ballot this spring. And then just today started a conversation with some people in regard to senior tax exemptions or potentially moving allowable tax exemptions to seniors who are now maybe living in assisted living places. So there's some facilities that are interested in how that might benefit their facilities as a whole, not to mention maybe
essentially benefits the senior themselves with reduced costs at those facilities. So anyway, just beginning to kind of broach that subject and potentially doing something similar to what Gino's already done. And then the other thing is we were scheduled, I believe it was April or May of last year, to do a bit of a tour in the Chugach River area to look at the hydroelectric plant and the water treatment facility, the senior center, and potentially the wastewater facility out in Eagle River as well. So we're trying to put that tour back together and see if we can't do that either. Well, chances are it'll be sometime next month, maybe November. But anyway, trying to put that together again.
Yeah.
That's it. Thanks.
Crystal, Austin?
Thanks, Suzanne. I don't have anything, I think, at this point of data going on. A couple of things I'm thinking about or working on, but very initial.
Thanks, Austin. Horace?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple things. There is a labor ordinance that I'm working on, but I'm speaking with some folks about that now. And if it comes, I won't just put it on the agenda. I'll ask for a work session in draft form. And so we'll have it won't be sprung, but we'll have plenty of time to discuss it in a work session. During the course of my last campaign, citywide, I became interested in the issue of ADUs in Girdwood, because I didn't realize that our ADU ordinance hadn't extended to them. But they have picked up that ball, as I'm sure the two members that represent the area know, and run with it. And now I believe it is before planning and zoning. So at some point that will come before us, but I'm not steering that. I'm just sort of on the edges and asking them to update me. But something that I'm very supportive of, although they at this point I think are still sort of moving in tandem with what something that Mr. Rivera said about the short-term rental issue. So maybe a little bit different issue than what Felix is referring to, but they of course have a lot of challenges with short-term rentals in Girdwood. I'm doing work with Desiree now with the budget committee, trying to work with the administration to schedule out the different work sessions we're going to have and the various opportunities to amend the budget. She's also doing a lot of work now trying to pull us necessary information so we have an understanding of some of the moving parts, and it looks like the administration, in fact, we all of you received a 120-day memo, but it looks like they are going to be pushing a little bit later in terms of some of the materials they're going to give to us versus last year, which perhaps makes sense. I'll say just a flag for everyone, one of the things in that 120-day memo that I have requested information from the administration and have not received an answer back yet is why there's been such a large drop in the maintenance operations bond. So in the 2021 5-year plan, they anticipated about $30 million, I think it was $27 million of bonds and maintenance and operations for 2022. And then 30 million next year, 30 million the year after. It's been about 30 million for a number of years. This year, they're only proposing 5, and then they're proposing going back up to 37 next year. So that's a very large difference. And so I've asked them, what's going on here? Are you anticipating federal infrastructure funds, or are we just sort of kicking the can, necessary maintenance down to next year? And I should say, in that 120-day memo you received, you probably noticed that they did include increased federal funds for the PM&E bond. So the overall amount of capital spend is about 20 million less, but 11 million of that is, or it would have been 30 million, but for $11 million of anticipated federal funds, new federal funds in PM&E, which I assume is the federal infrastructure package, but I'm not sure about that either. So just something to flag for you. It looks like they're taking a different approach to the bond, and that is something I'm very interested in during this budget cycle.
Great, thanks, Horace. How about you, Chris?
The two projects are this negotiated, facilitated collaborative group and the redistricting conversation that's about to kick off. Otherwise, my plate is got nothing new on it.
Thanks, Chris. I don't have anything substantial to report in any legislative projects I'm working on. Mostly I'm focused on some administrative issues and looking forward to when Claire comes on board later this month on the 27th. I will say that we've had some vendor meetings, vendors that will support technical needs concerning the reapportionment process. We're in the final parts of negotiation. I hope to have more specific information to hand off to the committee and share with the body in the next week or so. Does anyone have anything else that may have occurred to them while other people were talking? All right, thanks. We'll go ahead then and move on to other items. D, the budget priorities memo. Thanks to all of you who provided feedback. We do have a draft that is that I'll share with the group later, and I just want to say that just in going through the previous memos, I noticed that Austin and Felix, you had your final draft all done September 9th or 10th, I think, last year at this time. So it's a little bit later. But what we need at this point is a little bit more specific information on some of the items that are included, just to get a sense maybe of the cost and what specifically is being requested. So I'll ask the clerk to circulate that, and then if you could just share feedback to the clerk on that, that'd be great. Anybody have any questions or comments? Oh, Pete?
Well, I have something that's sort of another item that I wasn't sure where to bring up.
Sure.
But I've been working with Nils from AML and following special session down in Juneau and the budget discussions and that, and had a nice conversation with them yesterday morning. They're having a online call-in discussion with members from all over the state today that I wasn't going to be able to take part in because of meetings here. So, and then we got an update at the Western Jack Community Council from several legislators last night. Right now, the big thing for us is the $1,100 dividend. That's we had projected when we did the budget last year that we would have around $1,000 dividend, and so we would get $4 million or over $4 million from people who that we had attached to their dividend. So that would be a good thing that we don't have that hole in the budget to try to figure out how to fill. So, but the negotiations are still ongoing down there, and there's talk about possible additional special session. So the joy of it all.
Thanks, Steve. They just need to go year round like we do.
They already.
Yeah, I am just kidding. Okay. That brings us to the next item on under other items, D, redistricting or reapportionment project. We've talked in previous meetings about reapportionment, and given the critical importance of this work and the process, have created, as Pete mentioned, a special committee of 4 members who will take on the process and create a path forward. Assembly leadership is committed to an open, fair, and transparent process. And actually right now, I will go ahead and turn to Chris, who will be leading this special committee, which will consist of Crystal and Pete and Austin, the 4 of them. And Chris will go ahead and walk us through the document that he's submitting.
So as previously discussed, we are diving in headfirst into our reapportionment process now. If you kind of walk with me through the memo on the first page, there are 2 confounding elements to the redistricting process that would normally have us lining up and ready to go for the next year in our election. The first one, of course, is the 8-month delay of the census data because of the COVID pandemic. And the second issue of merit or concern is that the charter amendment that passed last year goes into effect on the day the state drops their state final plan, which the state has announced should be November the 10th. Essentially, the charter language reads that the assembly shall determine and declare by resolution whether or not which, again, November 10th. That kind of covers the front page, and that's just in detail there. With the charter, the charter amendment language, the effective date is listed at the top of page 2.
And Chris, if you could just pause for a second, we're gonna get the, a copy of the document to Meg and Jamie.
Scenario A is April 2020, we complete everything. And we have an election with new boundaries. That the gist of the challenge is that we ran out of all the time, 8 months we lost because of the census, and it's not just simply that we have to have the item introduced and passed by the December 24th meeting so that the notice of vacancy can be published on January 9th, which the code requires, but it's that all of the addressing that has to happen internally and validation of the addressing and all the tools that the Muni ArcGIS team needs to implement takes time as well, and the clerk estimates around December the 1st to the 5th would be the actual deadline. So for us to implement scenario A, we would have to work at a breakneck pace, and it's very unlikely that we could meet it because the public process, securing the contractor, drawing the maps, hearing from the public, amending the maps, and then finally passing the items. So it's possible, but not likely. Scenario B, the charter mandates that within 6 months of the declaration of malapportionment, the assembly shall reapportion itself in the manner provided by law. The state commission identified on the 10th, as I mentioned before, that would give the assembly up to 60 days to declare malapportionment, and then 6 months from that to reapportion itself. That pushes the far horizon of this conversation out to July 2022. Thus, those boundaries would certainly be in effect by the 2023 election. Scenario C, there are probably a number of options that may arise. One that is important to me for us to consider, and legal is doing their analysis on this now, and I believe it's allowable from the preliminary investigation, would be that we follow path B, which redraws the boundaries, implements the first round of elections in 2023 and the next in 2024 or 2025. But then we run a special election to fill the, and at a timeline that is in advance of waiting for the next April election. And so that to me would be desirable. We'll have that conversation with the committee as we go through it, and Dean will have more fulsome legal advice on the question as we move forward. And there are other options that members of the public and community may bring up to our attention. There was some conversation about truncation of terms. Would that be required? After extensive legal analysis, the answer to that question really is no. There's a case, Kentop v. Anchorage, from 1982 that I hope we may have for you in our packets as we go into the meeting at the next session, our subcommittee meeting. And the Kentop decision essentially says, and it's on point because this Anchorage case for the Supreme Court of the State of Alaska, that the court gives deference to the legislature and how the legislature wants to effectuate its apportionment. The apportionment plan in 1981 didn't modify the staggered terms of the assembly, but it did redraw the boundaries of all districts. Even with substantial change under the assembly's adopted plan, none of the member seats were voted on until the next year in 1982, and there were 5 members then, and then 6 members the next year in 1983. This plan was held up in the courts, and truncation was not constitutionally required. Sure.
Or Suzanne may ask. Sure. So you were saying, sorry, you're speaking so quickly, so I'm just trying to absorb it all. So
Yep.
You're saying if we had to fill the 12 seats in the option C, we would do a special election?
No,
Or what do you think?
so if I were, the original draft had option C is we fill path B, and we have a special election to fill District 1 seat A.
And that's assuming that it wraps up in July and we couldn't get it done or something, and then we would.
Even if we got it done at any time
That's
past
true, we're past the
the
election.
deadline of the timeline, which is really December 1st to the 5th. If we can't meet it then, that pushes off the reapportioned
Okay.
districts to be voted on until 2023. But 2022, we could have a special election on the new seat because it wouldn't have a.
Got it. But it would only be for like 6 to 9 months or something.
No,
Or
it
no,
would be the whole term, the remainder of the term, because that term actually is set to be voted on, if you will,
Okay,
on
I see.
the April 2022 election.
Okay, got it.
Ms. Kenya.
Okay, and so we've got Crystal and then Dean also, thank you, and then Forrest. Crystal?
Okay, thank you. Actually, I guess I would question, and maybe Dean already is formulating an answer on this one, but I would question whether or not you could actually appoint somebody to that new seat, not knowing or not being able to recognize how that might affect people currently in current seats.
Yeah, at first, I would say it wouldn't be an appointment, it would be a special election. Just so we're really clear.
Okay, sorry, yeah, special election regardless, actually, even if you did either one, it would be a problem, or it could be a problem, considering that you could actually have a sitting member in that district at that moment. If you're not electing for all of the seats, all of the potential seats, according to how you've drawn the boundaries, you could actually be, if you did that, you could be inadvertently kicking the current seating member off of their current seat in order to basically get the additional
I think that would be possible
seated.
if
So
the
that
lines were
muddies
set.
the waters, I guess is what I'm saying. So I'm not sure you actually could do that separately.
But wouldn't they be in the same district?
It depends.
Like if there are two per district, what?
And so,
That's good. I thought.
Sure. You must have permission.
Yes, thank you. I asked to speak mostly first. I was gonna, what Mr. Constant said about having a special election, and what you said is correct. We have a new proportionate map that 12 member, and you can have a special election to fill out 12 seats without truncating anybody else's term. That special election can be soon after the proportionate map is adopted. The ordinance, when you adopt that, you might have language included or a concurrently adopted resolution or ordinance setting out a special election. It could be sometime soon after, or it could be concurrently with the 2023's election, regular election, special election to just fill out the remainder of that 12 members' term, sure, for convenience, administrative efficiency, and things like that. So that's just another idea. We soon after July or August, or the April election, but it's a special election. If it's a 3-year term, but just a partial term since it's a new seat, and we missed the April 2022 election date. So that seems to me more fair to the voters than making them wait 2+ years for getting the additional member for District 1. So just another thing to consider, perhaps at the timing of that special election, that's a possibility without truncating anybody else's term. And then Mrs. Kennedy just brought up the possibility of appointing someone to that new seat. And I actually had not considered that before, but I don't think I considered it before because appointment is to fill a vacancy. But I didn't think of this previously in terms of being a vacancy, because vacancy is created by some triggering event, a resignation, or a death. I mean, God forbid, but it's something like that. This isn't a vacancy per se, it's newly created seat. So I will get that some more, but my instinct is probably not the road we should go down. But I really can into that more and provide better analysis.
And Crystal, you had a follow-up?
Right. Potentially, depending on how those lines are drawn, you can have current members in that new district right now. You could end up with 3 people, or 4 people in that new district who are now apportioned to a different district. But once you've drawn those lines, it's kind of like, okay, now we start from ground zero. So that's what I'm saying is I don't know how you conceivably have a whole election or you appoint somebody if potentially you have people now overlapping in the so-called new district. So I just think it gets very complicated. And I hope we're not apportioning our lines based on who's living where right now. I mean, that's, I know that's.
We're not the legislature.
So if I might just read, okay.
Yeah, thank you. I, just as I finish speaking, have that additional thought on the appointment question. In our charter, it says if the vacancies were 6 months before the next election, then the assembly shall have special election to fill vacancy. And so, although I'm not calling this a vacancy, I think that instinctively the same principle would apply. And if this is a new seat, that the next regular election is 2 years out, definitely more than 6 months. It seems the sort of spirit of the charter would be to have special election to fill it now. Anyways, and then the other question that you had about drawing the lines and where current representatives live. I think we cross that bridge when we get there, because we don't know where the lines are, and you might have several options about where lines are for different members. It's true you could have a very unusual situation where members actually live in the same district because a line is moved for one member. And this is though what Kintop is about. Then you look at it's a political decision. Do you want to truncate because of that or not? And there's no constitutional requirement that you have to truncate. Because this is a short period of time, you know, in 1981 it was 2 years of time where we transition with this sort of disparate representation because of the redrawn lines, but that's okay because this is a periodic review, drawing the slated boundaries that spans decades at a time. So the Constitution and our charter doesn't require members or redrawn lines that you have to truncate to move them around. It's just you don't want to leave them there for 5, 6 years, and 1, 2 is okay under the charter and Constitution, but it's a political decision. It's proven by the Assembly's votes.
And if I might add, just the specific language from the finding of the court says deference similar to that of the governor in fashioning a state reapportionment plan is due the Anchorage Assembly in its decisions regarding these options of the municipal reapportionment plan. Whenever a legislature is composed of members elected in staggered terms, the temporary disenfranchisement of transferred voters is an inevitable consequence of the reapportionment, does not constitute invidious discrimination in violation of the constitutional guarantee to equal representation. And so they're literally, and it may be litigated again because anyone can make a case, but the history on point tells us that we don't have to stagger the terms and that we should exercise great care not to be discriminatory in our process, one way or the other. So then finally, there will be binders available. Folks will have all these documents and there will be a committee page set up on the committee page, and it should have a slate of documents available for download right now that are germane to this conversation. The intent of the chair is to establish a 4-person committee, lead process from assembly, called Committee for Reapportionment. It will be independent of other committees and will set out a meeting calendar, proposed timeline at its earliest opportunity. And as Chair of the Press, Suzanne said, it's the intent to select a contractor to facilitate the reapportionment process. Will assist in initial analysis, map making, facilitating the public process, and aiding the assembly in the process of aligning new district boundaries. So that is the initial framework. This is a light level conversation. At 3:30, we'll be sitting down and having the first conversation on the topic. Should be on your calendars. If it's not, it's interesting, Barbara, a number of folks didn't have it on their calendar.
Okay, we'll have to take a look at
Are the 3 people didn't?
Did you get it for your calendar?
I emailed it to just 3 people.
I'm sorry, okay, and it was published on the municipal website, right?
It was published as an event.
Okay, it's an event.
Yeah, it wasn't published as a meeting.
Okay.
And it was not on the what's ahead or the assembly calendar.
Okay, so we'll confer on that question and we'll get back to you on what's gonna happen after this meeting.
Okay, and then in the meantime, we've got Forrest, and I think Austin, no, not the queue, and then Meg. So Forrest and then Meg with questions.
So I have a question for Dean about effective dates. So if our intent perhaps is to take the time we need and pass let's say it's like March or April, we finish our work, we pass this, but it's going to go into effect for the 2023 election. Can we set off the effective date of the ordinance so that we don't force a bunch of special meetings, or so that literally the new map goes into effect either on January 1st or 6 months before the April election, or on the date of the April election? Like, can we use effective dates that way? are we constrained by the charter that as soon as we pass it, effectively the date, the match is in effect?
Well, my instinct is that you do have the right to have a delayed effective date, and you need to have that in the ordinance. The ordinance will not say it's not effective X date or X election. I think though the effective date for Prop 12 and having the additional member was intended to be would be reapportionment for the purposes of reapportionment. That you have lines that reflect there's 12 members now, and not necessarily that you have to have a 12 member right then. So I think you can do this to get effective date. I would definitely be looking at that question more closely though. But my general instinct right now is that yes, you can have a later effective date from now. If I understood correct, all the options.
Doesn't this case cover that? Saying that even if you had an effective date that was more than 6 months before the regular election, you wouldn't have to necessarily have a bunch of special elections to change it. You could do it in the next election. That's
Right. You don't have to have a special election. That's definitely the case. I think for my part, I'm going to advocate for adopting the map within the timelines of the charter so that we can get the 12-member person on board. Right, that's important value. And then the elections for our staggered terms can continue in the regular order.
But I think there is, Member Kennedy does bring up an interesting point about the expansion of that 12. So for example, if that, for the person running for that district, that seat, that special election, obviously it would be the new expanded district, right? It would be the new expanded lines, not the old lines. And so they would be running with several other folks in that district. And I think we just have to be mindful of either setting the truncation out, to the 2023 election or further, or giving people time to move deeper into their district essentially. But I guess the point is it's all a political question.
Truncation is optional. Yeah. So I don't know, and Dean had some interesting advice that it may not be wise to truncate some and not others because it could look political, and that could create subject to judicial review. So we'll have those conversations as the committee goes forward, but for sure those conversations are closely under investigation.
Sorry, you need better grammar. Meg, then Crystal?
Thanks, Suzanne. So my question my request actually to the committee and Chris is, as you go through each scenario, if you could keep track of them and keep them in a chart as to how they play out and how the discussions are, so that when you come back and we have an opportunity to talk about this, we can kind of see where you've been. You may not have to backtrack through all of it all over again, because I presume you'll get pretty far into the weeds, but if you can kind of play out the various scenarios in a chart somehow so we can see all the permutations that were considered, so then we can understand if there's a recommendation coming forward. I think that would be really helpful. I appreciate the memo, but it raises all sorts of questions, some more than it answers, because of the potential for all the different scenarios. So a chart would be really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. Crystal?
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the committee itself, the makeup of the committee. I thought that had already been decided. I know that from the get-go, I think it was Mr. Constant that said, Chris said that he wanted to be on it because it's his district, and I think Pete said he wanted to be on it because he wasn't running again, and Jamie said she wanted to be on it. And, then I was asked this morning to be on it. And then now, Austin's on it. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to, I'm not real comfortable with the fact that, the people who wanted to be on it are not going to be on it. And then I'm basically replacing another member that wanted to be on it. So I just thought I would kind of,
Yeah.
why not? Let's,
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. No, I appreciate you asking that question. And it's true, there were members who asked to be on it, some publicly, some not publicly. And so I think maybe folks may not realize that. A lot of people wanted to be on this committee. And for better or for worse, it is the prerogative of the chair to select who is on the special committee. And it wasn't a replacement for anybody. It was an ongoing consideration of the role and needs of the committee. And I do understand, though, it feels that way. Chris and I have been working to pull together different information and figure out a path forward. So I would just say that it's been in process, and that a lot of people wanted to be on this committee. Okay, all right, and thank you all who have agreed to serve on it. I mean, like the other 3 members who are doing the work on the facilitated process, you are in for a lot of work, so thank you in advance for being willing to take that on. And at the end of the day, I mean, all members, of course, I mean, this is going to be, all the meetings will be publicly noticed. All members are invited to attend those committee meetings as well. And everything will end up, as always, before the body in a public process as well. Thanks, Crystal.
Thanks.
Did you want to add anything, Chris?
Just to Meg's question, the point of the memo was to raise questions and begin the process. The committee and then the body will answer the questions. And if and when we identify the final contractor, they will be helping us make sure all of the various permutations, to use your term, or scenarios are demonstrated.
Thanks, Chris. And we've got Jamie in the queue, and then we'll go to you, Pete. Jamie?
Thank you. I appreciate you letting us assembly members know that there were other people who wanted to also be on the committee. What is blatantly obvious is that Miss Kennedy and I are from the same district, and Miss Kennedy was asked to be on it where I had already volunteered. So it's obvious that perhaps, maybe it's not. Would somebody like to just say why they didn't want me on the committee? I mean, it's obvious that the committees I am on, that the chair and vice chair have refused me to be a chair on any other committee. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around, why is it that you did not want me to be on the committee for redistricting?
Thanks, Jamie. That's an interesting way to phrase it. I would say again that it's the prerogative of the chair to select members who will be able to best work together to tackle this issue. I appreciate your offer, like others who offered and wanted to be on the committee. Was not able to accommodate everyone and used judgment in determining what would create what I thought would be a productive committee.
Can I do a quick follow-up, Ms. Chair?
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so bottom line is that I can't speak for anybody else, believed that it would be better for my fellow assembly members could not put something or somewhat aside to work on a nonpartisan issue. So you felt that we could not get along. Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Gates is in the queue.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to mention and make sure it's clear to everybody that this committee is simply a committee that's going to do some of the work with the contractor and produce some alternative options, several maps. They can't just decide and propose one. I think the case law is pretty clear. It simply should decide among several reasonable alternatives in terms of what lines, what the reapportionment, where the lines were drawn. So after the county's work is done, this comes before this body, and any one member can have an additional ordinance or exclusion. Or I think any one member could have a different proposal, and I will help work any member that wants to do something different than what the comedy brings forward.
Thanks, Dean. So we've got Pete in the queue.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know that the state redistricting board has actually been meeting at the Legislative Information Office all week. And they're taking public testimony, and they're looking at maps that members of the public have drawn to consider those maps. And they've got an aggressive timeline to redraw the state lines by November 10th. And so the board is working to meet that deadline. And so if we as a subcommittee are following along as they're making progress, we could possibly meet the December 5th deadline. We can have special meetings to do that if necessary. So just want to throw that out there.
Thanks, Pete, appreciate that. And I did want to mention something because it was brought up, prior rules committee meeting. I think there was a suggestion of making the reapportionment committee a subcommittee of ethics and elections. And the reason why we didn't do that is because we need to keep the ethics, the elections piece separate from this part. We need to have some, distinction, very clear delineation between the two, given that there are likely to be some political conversations or issues that come up during reapportionment. We just wanted to make sure those were absolutely. And Chris, did you want to comment on the meeting that we had talked about for today?
Yeah.
The issue with the calendar.
Absolutely. So we just, I think, had a bit of a miscommunication for the meeting that was scheduled for 3:30, and I think we're going to cancel it today because we want to make sure it's properly noticed and everyone gets the right information. So one thing we could do right now is discuss what would a good standing time be to meet during a week or every other week or whatever, so that we can identify the time now that's agreeable. I hate to make sausage like that, but this is a committee, and if we do that, then I think we're remarkably far ahead. So.
Well, typically we don't have anything on Mondays. All right.
You want to ruin that? That's a good thing.
I mean, if we're trying to meet a deadline, that's.
How about 1 a.m. on Wednesdays? 12:30 a.m. Just roll right in. 1 a.m.
They're immune from our activities after midnight, so that won't work. But Monday isn't a terrible day for me.
My preference is to do it when we have other meetings, so that we're not, like for me, I have another job, and so I don't really want to come here just for that, if possible. But.
So then that argues for either Thursdays or Fridays.
And I would go for Thursday.
Okay. Is there any disagreement with Thursdays as a regular matter?
Are any of us on CPC?
Yeah.
Or, Crystal, I'm sure Crystal. Okay, so that could get us in. I was thinking before committees, because sometimes we have enterprise at 11, budget at 12. We could do it at like 1 or 2.
It doesn't have to be every week.
That's true.
And it could be every other week as we do the work.
I just don't want it to interfere with one of those committees. That's true if we did like every other week on the off weeks of CPC, we could do it before.
So does 9 o'clock on a Thursday that isn't a CEDC day work for people?
For me.
Crystal? Okay,
So I think we got, people got disconnected, so maybe Jamie may not be with us.
Oh.
Right now. Jamie just said she got disconnected.
Oh, no, shoot, okay.
Okay, so it sounds to me like Thursday at 9 on the off weeks of the CEDC meeting is a generally acceptable time. Okay. Right. We'll
So
build
does
on
that start next, Is CEC on the 16th? No, we just met today. Okay, so let's start next.
Please enter your participant or moderator code followed by the pound key.
Thursday the 16th.
Please say your name followed by the pound key. You are the first participant in the conference.
Jamie and Meg will be joining here shortly. Although I think we're just about ready to wrap up. Anything else concerning the apportionment process? We will get to assembly participation, or assembly audience participation.
And plan for an hour, Chris.
Yeah, we'll start with an hour and build from there.
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay.
So on the agenda, or on the memo, it states, I want everyone to understand this, that we will have committee meetings, we'll have work sessions, we'll have probably a couple town halls, we'll have public hearings, and we'll vote. And so all of these elements will occur in the process, all publicly noted.
Thanks, Chris. And I don't know, Meg, are you back on? Meg had texted a comment about it's better if things don't start before 9:15, and that if they're done by 3:15, because of school and stuff and drop off.
I'd be better with 9:30, then we could just roll into the 11 o'clock. We're only gonna go for an hour. Because otherwise we leave an hour.
And we'll start there. I'm guessing we may find we need more time, but in which case we can move earlier as needed. So 9:30 is fine.
We could even do 9:30 to 11 eventually, because your meeting starts at 11.
Oh,
So
perfect.
that's what she said.
Okay,
yes.
yeah.
Okay, great. All right, well, any other comments or questions? If not, we'll go ahead and move on to audience participation. Mr. Haberman?
My name is Eugene Carl-Haven. I represent myself, follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, a decision made by the governing body is more likely in public interest. Number one, I wasn't expecting to say this, but you're talking about a committee, reapportionment, redistricting. That's not on the list of, on the website for me as one of the committees. Also, the supposed notice for that meeting that you had, I don't see anything notice in reference to that meeting. So what was the public able to know about that? All issues reapportionment. Now, earlier today, I spoke before the Committee of Economic Development of the Assembly, and I reminded them that the Assembly is meeting with the school board tomorrow, 10 o'clock, during a meeting up in City Hall upstairs. Now, the school board meeting, last one, everyone was wearing face coverings. That was a rarity for me to see anywhere in all the meetings I attend, particularly in the last few months. But to see, I asked the school board not to have that meeting upstairs, but they were silent. I also said, concerned that, I forgot the word I was going to say, but you need your meetings in the SAC library. And there's more reason I said, even before COVID, this is not a working situation here, the way things are operating. It's more of the same, and it's deteriorating, and it's not connecting with the public and yourself, and have a proper record. It needs to be in the SAC library. COVID gives even more reason to have that meeting in the SAC library, Assembly Chambers. Now, you've had a debate and request to the administration, say, hey, let's work this, get this thing more, deal with COVID. And the response to the administration is one way, and then, but even without the administration, you're in charge of your meetings. You can have your meetings in the SAC library, but you continue to move not only meetings of work sessions, committee meetings in this room, but you had 2 special meetings of the Assembly in this room. This is horrible. And one of them was dealing with figuring out a date of the vote for recall of some members out of town. This is not the place for it. It wasn't a place before COVID. It wasn't a place during COVID, and it's certainly not a place in the future. And I plead with you, showing you how the safety and the mask issue is a real issue and needs to be dealt with appropriately. And you had a meeting earlier today where the administration, every one of them, was not wearing face coverings in that presentation dealing with monies on CARES Act monies and where the money is going to come from. In the meantime, before you get it from the feds, they're not even wearing face coverings. Administration, Mamie DeBosky and the others. Almost every one of you were, most of the time. But in all respect is, how do you expect the public to be happy with what you do when you need to keep the public at a distance more every day? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman.
My time's up.
Thank you. Seeing no other members of the public here to participate, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.